Finally made it to Dick Proenneke's cabin up in Twin Lakes, Alaska, in the heart of the Lake Clark National Park, I think it's called. I have essentially the place to myself. There is 2 rangers that spend the summer here in Spike's cabin up the shore of the lake, and there's a few people in here right now that are in just for the day visiting. They flew in for several hours. They're doing a hike, and then they're heading back out this evening. So other than that, I've got the place to myself for 3 days. So my camp's pretty well set up. This is it. Just sleeping with a bivvy, open air, looking up out at the mountains, right beside the lake. Hopefully I can catch a lake trout or grayling off ashore for dinner tonight, maybe for breakfast, and just enjoy the place and the quiet here all by myself. Incredible. So happy to be here. It's actually overwhelming to step foot inside Dick Proenneke's cabin after reading about him for years and watching the Alone in the Wilderness series on PBS back in the 70s, and a few times over the years since then. Pretty incredible place. You know, as much as I'm enjoying what I'm doing, of course, where I am building my cabin and living that lifestyle, outdoor lifestyle, have to admit, so overshadowed by this location that I'm afraid I'm not going to appreciate where I am when I get back. Like I said, nice to be there still, but it's just, I don't know. I mean, take a look around. How do you compare anything to this? To live in a cabin in the wilderness, it just doesn't get any better than this, in my opinion. Anyway, like I said, I know I'll still appreciate what I have where I have it. But like Dick Proenneke and what I've just discovered talking to the ranger and taking a look around the cabin, looking at the books and the journals and stuff, is that essentially he built things for the first 2 years, and then after that he spent the next 28 years just exploring, visiting family and friends, both in town and down in the lower states, hiking the ridges and exploring the place with park rangers, and going back into town, Port Alsworth, flying back there to do work on the farm and helping out around the village. So it's not, so cabin living is not just for me, and I know for Dick Proenneke as well, or I know for me and Dick Proenneke, just knowing by his journals and what I'm hearing from other people. The cabin is a base, it's a home base to continue to, of course, enjoy the area, but then also use that free time, the time that's been freed up by having a place that's relatively low cost and low maintenance, to be able to then take that extra time and go out and enjoy life and experience new things. So again, to me, it's not an escape from society. It's not a hermitage. I'm not trying to avoid society and my responsibilities. It's just a matter of surrounding myself primarily with nature and immersing myself in it, and allowing this to be my safe place, I guess, if you can call it that. Place that I can de-stress and recharge, and then go out and experience life still with family and friends, and see new places and do new things. That's what I'm trying to create at my cabin, and this is one of the places I get to experience and get to visit and enjoy as a result of the lifestyle I chose. So again, for me, that just makes everything worthwhile. It makes the sacrifices worth it, and just refocuses my attention on the things that matter, especially, like I said, nature, time alone, but also time with my family, whom I miss a lot right now. Actually, I've been out for 5 days now. I've got many more days ahead of me to explore Alaska before I return home. So, like I said, I am missing them on one major hand, but on the other hand, I'm enjoying what I'm doing here as well. And I'm fortunate enough that not only do I have the time and resources and energy to do this, but I also have family that supports it. So I thank them for doing this, for allowing me to do this, or for encouraging me to do this. The camp is pretty well set up. Like I said, this is my bed for the night. Can't think of any better location, and I think I'll collect maybe a little bit of firewood, but other than that, I'm ready to go back and explore the cabin and his homestead, take it all in, see every little detail, and then maybe go for a hike before catching something for dinner. Amazing. So always curious about his Dick Proenneke's site selection for the cabin. You look around this beautiful lake, so many good locations. I think it's a nice spot up on the high ground where that other cabin is. Further down the shoreline, that's a nice high spot. I think it was taken by the looks of it, or by the sounds of it, when Dick Proenneke chose this site. But I was looking at all this flat ground and behind me, and it's all gravel and it's cleared. And I thought, on first glance, that would look like a perfect site to put the cabin. But I think, pretty sure why it's scoured clean like that is that when Hope Creek is really running strong, or it gets plugged, it flows through this whole valley right here and it removes all the topsoil. That's why it's all clear gravel like that. So it looks like an ideal spot, beautiful, closer to the creek, which is handy when the lake's frozen. That water's always flowing to get fresh water for drinking and cleaning and stuff. But it would be a potential hazard. Probably didn't happen all that often where it would flood that whole section, but maybe in the spring it does all the time. I'm not sure. So I like the selection. I like where we put the cabin. It's pretty cool. It's isolated. It's protected. Gets a nice enough breeze, but it's not subject to extreme north winds and or winds coming down the valley. I mean, through the creek or the lake valley, and still has relatively easy access to Hope Creek for fishing and for getting water when you. Well, I'm not sure about Dick, but I would have probably sometimes got the water from there rather than keep a hole open in the ice, the 3-foot thick ice in the winter. Anyway, I'm going to go to the cabin right now. I want to check out his canoe that's still sitting there, his original canoe.
got Hope Creek, Hope Valley, Hope Mountain. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so we just use a saw.
So you'll notice in the storage room. So this was interesting to me too. So the Weiser's cabin, I think it was called. It predated, I believe, Hope and Dick Carrithers' cabin that they built in 1962. I believe they built Spike's cabin in 1962, and I think Hope's cabin was like 65 or 67. And I believe Dick Proenneke helped them build that one as a guest cabin. Prior to that, though, I think Weiser, I think his name was, had a cabin further down the shoreline, so east of all of those cabins, and Dick Proenneke used it as storage for some of his equipment. I think the canoe, if it wasn't in Spike's cabin, I think it was probably in Weiser's cabin during the winter. Right now, some of the things are stored there. I'm not sure how much Dick Proenneke actually had put of that in there himself, or that the National Park Service has put in there since. So I was able to go through that cabin and look at some things like this kicker motor. I think it's a Sears 3.5 horsepower motor that he used to go on the back of his canoe. So you'll notice the back of the canoe, the stern actually has a flat back. That's to put a motor on. We call it a skidoo. And that was so that when he had further to go or needed to make up time, or the weather was rough and he wanted to navigate the waves with a motor rather than trying to paddle into them, he would put that motor on. So it was effective for him. It's really not a very comfortable or safe motor to use. I've used a kicker like that in the past, and with no proper gears, forward or reverse. Only had forward, no reverse, no neutral, and runs really fast. Not the safest thing to use on your own, and I bet for that reason he didn't use it all that often himself. But he did have that power and available to him, and he had fuel, gasoline to go in it, of course, for that purpose. So that's stored in this other cabin. The little sifting can or tray that he made, I forget what he used that for, but he did make it from one of the fuel canisters as well. Not sure if that was for sifting gravel or for berries or what it was. But anyway, that's in there, and then some crampons, some old Army surplus crampons that he used to walk on the ice, which he used all of the time apparently. They were in that cabin as well, and then a couple of other things like his skis, and I'm not sure again how much of it's authentic or how much was his, how much is original, but there's just miscellaneous tools and nails and stuff like that in there. But I think typically after Spike Carrithers had a stroke in the 60s, I'm not sure if he ever got back up there after Proenneke built his cabin, so he may have just used Spike's cabin all of the time for storage. I know he lived in it while he was building his cabin in 1968. So I thought that was interesting, that cabin. Also the other cabin, I just came across the name of it, the private cabin that's west of Proenneke's cabin up on the Cowgill Benches, something farm I think it's called, and I'm not sure why. That I believe predates Proenneke's cabin by quite a bit as well, and I don't know the story behind that. I assume it was a hunting outpost or hunting cabin for somebody, because it was a very popular hunting area over the decades, probably going back to the 40s, I would imagine, when Babe Ellsworth homesteaded Port Alsworth, and it created this sort of hub that people could refuel and then head into the backcountry to hunt and fish from. I always thought the spikes and the boards like this and then the window coverings and stuff was a little bit overkill, but all the spikes are here at the front door, and here's where the bear's trying to get in, and it's definitely a grizzly, so look how wide that is. And it's like 3 inches between claw marks. That's fairly fresh too, actually. Yeah. Trying to claw his way into this cabin. Crazy. Wouldn't want to be in there when that was going on. Still kind of amazed that I'm here actually. Just finished dinner, cooking up that grayling that I caught at Hope Creek, right where Dick Proenneke used to catch his dinner. Sitting out here looking at the same landscape that he looked out at. Not much would have changed since then. The mountains, everything. It's just incredible here. No little to no development. Just these cabins. There's a cabin across the lake there that you can actually rent, and occasionally people are in there. I don't know. This park doesn't sound like it's very busy. Apparently 1,000 people a year come into Twin Lakes, come and visit here, and most of those are just day trippers. Very few people actually spend the night here. So I'm fortunate that I was able to find time to spend 2 nights here. And again, I'm so shocked or surprised at how long the days are. I don't know why I never thought of that before I came out. I didn't really realize. I knew that sunrise was around 11:30 at this time of year on these dates, 11:30 p.m. and sun up I think it was around 4:30 or 4:40. I don't know why I just assumed that it was actually dark at that time between those hours, but it's not. All that means is the sun dips below the horizon, but barely, so the sky is still light. In fact, as light as I don't know, like half an hour after sunset, which is still quite bright. It's basically daylight. Like, I haven't even noticed. We've stayed up later than that a few nights, and I don't even notice it being darker than it was at 8 o'clock. Anyway, I'm adjusting to that still, so I still might go for a walk over to the Cowgill Benches over here. I don't know, it's probably 8:30. I'm not even going to bother checking. Just go to bed when I'm tired. Anyway, like I said, I'm still overwhelmed, and I brought the book along, of course, and I've been making notes in it as I go through this week. I just wanted to read a couple of pages from these dates 51 years ago. So 51 years ago is when he built the cabin. Cut the logs the prior year, so 52 years ago, 1960, get this right, 1968 he built the cabin, so 1967 he cut the logs down. I was born in 1970, to put that in perspective. So sounds like a long time ago to most, or some people if you're younger, but it's really not that long. Not that much has changed. In fact, I see the things that he used, some of the equipment, and I used that same equipment, those same tools when I was younger, and still do to this day, some of them. Anyway, so I did want to read a couple of excerpts. So what I'll do is I'll read today's July 14th, so July 14th, 2019 right now. I'll read the excerpt from July 14th, 1969. Or 1968, so 51 years ago. So just go back one day, so July 13th, it says he got a small char on the trot line, and in its stomach and found a hook I lost a few weeks ago, bright as silver. It looked better than when it was lost. I put the roof pools on the woodshed. Next comes the indoor plumbing project. The front framework is in place, just the right height for comfort. Sourdough biscuits drenched with navy bean soup for dinner. There's a dish fit for any working man. So July 14th, so like I said, that's today, 51 years ago. He wrote, "Still beset with a siege of damp weather. This will be a day for inside chores. fire up the smoker and give that big slab of bacon some more smoke. Letters to write, work on the wolf track box, put a fresh kettle of navy beans to simmer the day away. In the afternoon I popped some corn. I accomplished what I had set out to do. A man needs a catch-up day now and then. So it's amazing how similar probably lives are, people that were living long before him in log cabins, what he did and then what I'm doing, what other people who live in cabins, what you do in a day. You have your chores that you do every day outside, but then on those inclement weather days it's nice to get some stuff done inside, because otherwise you don't choose to do that. I don't choose anyway. I don't choose to work inside unless I'm forced to. In fact, there's lots of things in my cabin inside that are still not done, simply because I don't really need them to be done. Like finishing the loft, for example. I keep talking about building in shelves and stuff. Right now I still keep all the clothes and tools and gear, sleeping stuff. I put it in boxes up there to protect them, mostly from mice, but it still would be convenient or much nicer to have proper like drawers even. Anyway, there's a bunch of stuff like that, shelves on the main floor. Finishing off the kitchen, I still haven't finished the drawers in the left side of the kitchen, the cupboards. There's quite a few things that, like I said, I just don't make them priority because I would rather work outside and get the bigger projects done. So I guess after 2.5 years since I started the cabin, not much more than 2 years actually, I'm seeing an end to the bigger project. So I see that time, and I'm interested in following up on the rest of his journals after, say, 1970, because and I have read quite a few of them, but there's a couple of editions that I haven't read that fill in some of the years that I haven't read, and just curious how he spent his time. Now, talking to the warden here earlier today at Dick Proenneke's cabin, she gave me a tour of his cabin, and then also the other cabins, Dick's cabin and Hope cabin, and she was telling me about, in those journals, about all the people that he used to spend time with. So he'd leave here briefly to go and visit people in Port Alsworth, his family down, his brother in particular down in California, his family in Iowa, and just stuff in the like I said, Port Alsworth. I don't know how often he got to Anchorage, but anyway, he did socialize still. He still got out and still had people visit. But he did an awful lot of hiking, is what I understand, and just exploring the area. He said he wore a pedometer one year. I forget how many kilometers or miles he said he walked that year. It was a huge amount. More than 3,000. Was it 30,000? Anyway, I looked that up. So that's what he did. That's the great thing about not having a job. Now, he was retired, don't forget, and had time and enough money to live this lifestyle without having obligations or having a job in particular, and he didn't have a wife, so he was able to essentially make a decision each and every day, pretty much what he wanted to do that day, and just do it. So so that's what he did. Just went for hikes, long hikes, exploring and documenting all of the things happening in nature here, the water, the precipitation levels, the ice thickness in the winter, the game that he saw, the animals, just the cycles, when ice out went out when it came in. So documenting sort of climate or long-term weather patterns. So that's, believe it or not, time consuming enough that it ends up filling a day. And then there's the chores like cooking. Like I do the same thing. He put beans on, he does that a lot. I do the same thing. I'll just put especially in the winter when I have the wood stove running all the time, burning, I always have something on there, either a stock pot, a soup pot, or a chili, or something that can cook for a long time. So that takes some time though to prepare that and then monitor it. And firewood is a big chore. In the winter I've got fire, like I said, burning all the time, and yeah, I have to have firewood stockpiled at least a year in advance so it has time to dry. So that fills the day. So I thought it was interesting to see what he was doing on that date and what I did roughly a year ago on the same date, say July 14th, 2018, and then again July 14th, 2017. I just like seeing the parallels between what he did and now what I'm trying to do. I mean, I have a long way to go to be 100% into this full time, living in the cabin and not relying on my goal is to not rely on grocery stores very much, or to be buying clothing or much clothing and food and things like that. I want to get to a point, at least try for like a year, living completely off the land from things that I grow and harvest. So that's my plan. He didn't really care about that. He only hunted once or twice here and fished for a lot of his meals, but most of his food he actually had flown in regularly. Food from the land has just been one of my passions, something I've always been interested in. So I plan on doing more around that than he did. And I understand why he didn't. I know it. Probably one big part of it is that, first of all, I didn't want to kill the animals that he liked watching, and it's time consuming when you're harvesting and preserving, in particular, your own food. And if you're growing it, it takes a lot of management. And I think was more, even though he was living remotely with no neighbors, no immediate neighbors, he, I think, was restless enough that he didn't want to be tied down to a garden that he had to tend every day, which you'd pretty much have to. In fact, I'm gone for 2 weeks right now, and my vegetable garden was just starting to take hold. But I don't know what the weather's been like back home. But if it's been hot and dry like it was mostly when I left, then that could be shriveled up and dead by now. We'll see. Anyway, I think what I'm going to do, cut that one grayling. I think I might go down and take a few more casts. Actually, the wind's changing. Oh, what's that? That's west. Is it west? Yeah, it's west. Yeah, sure enough, the clouds are blowing out and I see a little bit of blue sky. I was worried I was going to get poured on tonight the way the clouds were building. So I think what I'll do is go down and take a few more casts, maybe half an hour of fishing, see if I can catch another fish or two. I might go over here, like I said, up on, I don't think I'm going to climb the mountain today at this time of day because there is some bears in the area and I don't want to. Bears tend to be less nervous around people, less wary, and a little bit more confident when it's darker. So in the evening they get active, and just don't want to push my luck here. I know there's a black bear with cubs behind here. I was walking down the beach with the warden after she was just telling me about that up on the mountain, but I noticed in the gravel as we were walking there was bear tracks walking along just ahead of us. So they're definitely here. And then there's been one brown bear, or a couple of brown bears back over the high ground there, which I'll have to be careful because I am going to hike that tomorrow. The other thing is I caught that fish and cooked it, cleaned it down by the water. Hopefully I got rid of all the scent, and then brought it up here and cooked it. Impossible to get rid of all scent, so if there's a bear around, it'll definitely smell it. Hopefully they're intimidated by the scent of humans and they have no interest in coming in to investigate the camp when I'm here alone. So we'll see. My first night sleeping in grizzly country alone, actually, and I don't know if I'm nervous. I'm aware. So we'll see if I sleep completely comfortably. And I'm tired, so I think I might, but I suspect I'll be a little bit more restless than normal, a little bit more awake and paying attention to the noises in the forest. Anyway, we'll see. I'll let you know in the morning whether I find any evidence of bears being around, or if I actually hear or see one in the night. This is one of the emotional and mental struggles when you want to live in a place like this, yet live off the land. And I'm sure Dick Proenneke went through this thought process when he first arrived at Twin Lakes. He did shoot at least one dull ram, dull sheep, and for meat, obviously. But I don't know if he ever hunted anything again. The only meat he ended up eating from the land was scraps left over from hunters. So if a group of hunters came in and shot a dull sheep on the other side there, they would often either just take the antlers and the choice cuts of meat, or even if they took most of the meat, they would leave, say, the rib cage or something and the organs. So Dick Proenneke would hear the shot, see that they had shot something, and wait till they left, and he would go across and get the meat. The point being that when you're living in an area and you love seeing wildlife, you don't want to harvest it all, shoot it all, because then you won't be seeing that wildlife any longer. You're going to start thinning out the populations, but also creating fear in the area so that they maybe move into a different area. Walking up the trail, I flushed a chick up into this tree right here, and then I took a couple more steps and the whole group, a family, flew up, and then the mother came clucking around trying to distract me, trying to drag me away. So she's up in the tree over here. There's one chick up in the tree with her, and the other chicks are sitting here calling back and forth with her. So I'm going to leave and let them reassemble so they're not in danger. They should be with their mother so they're protected. But if I was living here and I was trying to live off the land, ptarmigan would be something that's on the menu. Yet the more I harvested, the lower the population would be, unless I'd be able to see them. Now, generally, wildlife is a lot more resilient than our ability to find them and hunt them. They're a lot more cagey, so it's not like he would have, or I would in my case, deplete the animals in the immediate area, but that'd certainly make them more and more difficult to see as time went on. So, like I've mentioned, when that bear was hanging around the cabin, when I was first started building the cabin, I do eat bear meat, and I have a use for the hide as well, and the organs and the bones, everything. But if I had harvested that bear, then I wouldn't have been able to enjoy its presence. So it's a struggle. I think every hunter goes through that, especially as they get older. It's not about killing for the thrill, it's about harvesting ethically and sustainably to feed the family, but comes at a price of experiencing wildlife and nature from a different perspective. Immersing without overly impacting, however, that's extremely unnatural. It's not natural for humans to live on the landscape and not harvest animals or impact the environment. It's been that way for thousands of years, really millions of years. Okay, I'm going to leave because she's gone a little bit too far away from her chicks and they can't fly yet. Anyway, like I said, it is unnatural not to harvest food from the land. We just live in a time and a place where it's discouraged because we have this industrial agricultural system that feeds the population, but it doesn't feed us individually, and it doesn't feed us spiritually or emotionally, unfortunately. I'm going to push on now and see if I can find that bear thing without disrupting him. You can see why he never wanted to leave. The cabin is right down at the bottom of this valley, bottom Hope Creek. I don't know if you can see it in the camera. A little bit of creek showing right there through the trees. But look at the view. This is his daily commute. Just go for a walk back here, do some filming, photography, journal writing. On nobody's schedule but his own. Like, I'm overwhelmed actually. Like, as much as I'm enjoying where I live, I can't imagine being surrounded by this majesty every day. cool up here. You can watch the rain clouds coming across the sky, but also the rain falling, moving across the valley. It's a pretty incredible spot. I don't see any trails that come up here at all, not even game trails. I'm not sure how often anybody comes here. I doubt Dick Proenneke came up this way too often, because the trails are easier to follow down around the flatter ground than climb in more obvious open places, but a lot of foliage the way I came up. But just wanted to keep climbing, and I don't know if there's trails that lead up from other places. So I'm going to keep bushwhacking my way up through here. There is a black bear and sow-with cubs in the area on this hill that they've been glassing from down below, the rangers. So I gotta just stay vocal as I'm going through the thicker areas. I'm hoping to come across them. I'd like to get some photographs and film. I guess I probably should put my raincoat on too in case it really starts pouring. Anyway, beautiful, beautiful spot. Incredible. Like I said, I can see why he stayed here for 30 years. Dick Proenneke did this, just came up on the mountains, just watched the weather roll through. Pretty fascinating. But I was going to come up and hike this trail and go back, cross back over Hope Creek, go up the other side, Cowgill Benches, which is that hill, that mountain. But I think I'm just going to keep climbing here, spend the day climbing on this side, unless I can get across Hope Creek down in the valley. If there's a spot that's not too treacherous, because it's cut quite a, Hope Creek is cut quite a gorge coming off the glacier or the melt. There's glaciers up there, but all the snow melts, still snow on the peaks there, mid-July. So it's cut a long, deep channel all the way down to the lake. So like I said, I'm not sure if there's a spot I can cross up higher, like near where the creek is smaller. If there is, I'll do that. I'll continue going across this mountain, go down the valley, cross that creek, and then come back down that side of the creek so that I end up at my campsite without having to ford the river down at the bottom of the creek. But I'm in no rush. It doesn't get dark ever, but doesn't get even remotely dark. I think sundown, like I said in other videos, 11:30ish p.m., which means I theoretically could stay out, I don't know, until like, let's say 10 p.m. or something like that, without worrying about getting back when it's getting dusky, dark, when the bears get more active or less fearful. They tend to be more bold as the light starts going down, starts dropping. They know, I think they know they have an advantage. That's been my experience with black bears in the past. I have a lot of black bear experience back in Ontario, and I hear that grizzlies are not much different. Holy smokes, that's beautiful. Anyway, like I said, I'm sure Dick Proenneke spent lots of time just standing up here on the mountain watching this beautiful scene as it changes. This is also how bear attacks happen. Like I said, you think you're going to through an easy path of least resistance that's fairly low, and you get into it and it's like this. This would easily hide a moose or caribou, never mind a bear that's much shorter, especially a black bear. So I'm making lots of noise, so I'm not afraid of bumping a bear, but if you were trying to go through this and you got onto a game trail in particular that was fairly quiet walking, it'd be easy to walk you up on a bear in this. The other thing is you can't see the ground because the vegetation's so thick, so you can't see where you're placing your feet. So easy to twist an ankle or break a leg. I'm gonna get down to the forest or valley floor here, closer to it at least. See if I can get on a path, on a trail, either game trail or one of Proenneke's old trails. It's crazy. I thought I was down at the bottom. This was all low stuff. So it looked like from above it's still 3, 4, up to 5 feet high. So I'm soaking wet now. Luckily it's fairly warm. But this is what happens in a, basically, not a rainforest on the interior like this, but it's enough moisture, enough rain, and snow melt from high snowpack in the winter, and get through this stuff. It's a good exercise. This is insane. But the long days, it's a lot of sunshine, it's a lot of photosynthesis. That's what causes this to grow so prolifically. Incredible diversity and lushness. Alright, this is better. Still not perfect, so I am going to still try to find one of those trails. Curious how Proenneke found enough firewood in this country, especially 30 years worth. He spent 19 years here over the winter of the 30. Just to put that into perspective, the amount of firewood that you would go through, and in the winter obviously compared to the summer is immensely different, especially that little stove with the fairly thin metal, steel. But what burning softwood doesn't build up a bed of coals in the bottom, doesn't really retain heat, so you end up having to keep a fire going pretty intensely, and not just frequently but continuously. So the amount of wood that you would go through would be quite a bit, and I don't know about the density, I don't know what the BTUs of this, the output of this kind of wood here, but it's much different than it is back where I'm from in Ontario, Canada. Back there, spruce trees grow relatively fast compared to the further north, and it's therefore light, and it's not very dense. It's light and doesn't put out much BTUs, much energy when you're burning it. But when I see the size of these things, and there's a much bigger one actually right next to it. That is 20 to 24 inches in girth, across diameter, and it's a lot of firewood. Actually, that one's like 30 inches across, and it tapers. It's not that tall. It tapers fairly quickly. But that's a really old tree. Would have grown really slowly. Would be really dense and heavy, and it probably is pretty decent for firewood. I don't think it holds a coal like hardwoods do. I have the luxury of burning mostly sugar maple and some other hardwoods. So I don't have to deal with that. So I'm thinking how much time he would have had to spend collecting and processing firewood. Yeah, I'll show you the pack board that he had, that he strapped these short logs to, that he cut up with a handsaw. Keep in mind, all of his firewood was cut with a handsaw, and then he would take it back to the cabin and then split it into firewood pieces, firewood size. So immense amount of work. So when you're thinking that what does a guy do to fill his time up here, that's one of the things. So besides hiking these mountains looking for wildlife and scenery and exploring the area and keeping track of the environment, documenting the ecology and the weather patterns, climate and all that kind of stuff, water levels, processing firewood would have been one of the major chores. Now water sourcing was not difficult with Hope Creek right there, and then the lake in front. No shortage of water within walking distance, stepping distance, a few steps from the cabin, which is a little bit better than my situation. And this is much cleaner, colder water, and there's awesome fishing right there. I've already caught more than a dozen fish, grayling and char. So, and the conditions are right. The fishing's really good too. All right. Continue, get up in the mountains. Short day today because I have the plane coming, so I'm gonna enjoy this while I have time. I realize now what kind of shape Dick Proenneke was in hiking these mountains every day. I'm just not used to the higher elevation and hiking from a oxygen perspective, but also of course the difficulty in climbing hills, up and down hills. I thought I'd experience the scree up at the top here, so I walked up there and tripped my way along. That is not easy walking, and it actually can be quite dangerous if I was to continue to slide. So this trail that I'm sitting on right now is the trail that I saw the bear walking along yesterday. I was over on that rocky point over there looking up the valley and saw him probably close to about here when I saw him, I would guess. And he just continued all the way along till he got up to that canyon and to the right, and then he cut down into the creek. And who knows what he did, he could have followed the creek up. I didn't see him emerge on either side, and I waited 45 minutes probably. It's pretty incredible sitting here. Lots of people, I'm sure a lot of you go to the mountains or even live in the mountains, but for me this is just so different from where I'm from that, you know, this elevation from here down to the creek, to Hope Creek, is you know, I'd consider that a high spot in Ontario, and I'd be photographing it like crazy. Here is just everywhere is like that, and of course I'm only an eighth of the way up this hill and that mountain right there. Yeah, it's overwhelming. It's actually an incredible place, and this was a bucket list. That's why I kept saying before these videos that before this trip that it was a bucket list adventure for me, and it absolutely was, and it totally lived up to my expectations, which trips rarely do. A lot of times it's the anticipation that ends up being greater than the event itself, or the journey is greater than the destination, I guess. So in this case, the destination for me was worth every bit of the journey, including building the cabin, including being inspired to build the cabin and continuing to follow the Dick Proenneke story and reading up and watching everything on him. Just to sit here in the mountains and look across a valley and look at hills that Dick Proenneke described 40, 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago, yeah, 50 years ago, describing the animals that he saw on these Cowgill Benches, or up on Teetering Rock, or on the hump, or the mineral lick across the lake up on that high point where the goats or the sheep hang out. So yeah, it's putting the whole thing in perspective, and it's given me an absolute new respect and additional respect for Proenneke and what he chose to do with his life. I almost said accomplishment, and I'm trying to decide if it's an accomplishment or not. I don't know what's like the building of the cabin was very cool, and his cache and his woodshed. But now that I've done those things myself, I of course still fully appreciate that, and I understand now the work and effort in doing that since I've done them myself. And my upcoming cabin that I'm putting at the outpost will be actually very, very similar to the one Dick built, because boards, for look at the black flies in the camera, boards for example, that I ended up trying to make a few and then cutting, and then ended up buying a bunch and milled some myself with the chainsaw mill. It just felt like cheating to me all along, not because I'm trying to mimic Dick Proenneke, just because I've always felt like I've always had this drive, this desire to build a cabin completely by hand, by myself, with all the materials that I acquired myself, cut down. So I've accomplished that in various projects. So combined, I did accomplish that. I cut all the trees down, I made boards and all that, but in one single cabin I haven't done it. I've combined, bought and scrounged and borrowed and gifted materials in order to build them. So I'm looking forward to that project now more than ever. And I look forward to reading more of Dick Proenneke's journals, so that as I'm reading it, I can put the whole thing in perspective. And like I said, just thinking of the shape that he had to be in. He started at 50. I'm only 49 now. I started the cabin 2 years ago, so I guess I was 47. So I had just turned 47. Yeah, I guess I had just turned 47. And I'm 49 now, like I said. And Dick Proenneke started building the cabin and hiking these hills when he was 50 and continued till he was 80. So I hope I have that stamina. I hope I have that longevity, and I continue to live an outdoor lifestyle and continue to appreciate everything that's around me, including my own place. And I hope I get to see more places like this. It's actually emotional. I actually am overwhelmed by the feeling that I have at this place. I suspected that might happen, but I wasn't sure. And like I said, now that I'm here, I am overwhelmed. I don't know. It's taken hold of me for sure. So unfortunately, I only got to spend the 2 nights here. And I do have to get back. I see a plane. It's another thing, reading the journals about of the days that Proenneke was hiking in the hills, and he would see a plane fly in, and he hoped that he would get back to the lake before the person left, or that he would know that he was not going to get back before the person left. So that's unique as I watch these planes come in and out again, delivering visitors. Mostly day trippers. Hardly anybody has actually stayed here this year. A couple of backpackers came in yesterday across this trail. They've been on the trail for 8 days apparently, and they finished up in Twin Lakes, but a plane picked them up within an hour of hitting the lake. I was up here. I could see somewhat of what was going on from up on the hills, up on this mountain. But yeah, hardly anybody stayed in that campground. The fishing was awesome right from shore of Hope Creek on my side, on the campsite side. So I was able to have a couple of meals of fish, again harkening back to what Proenneke was doing. And to go in the cabin and handle the tools that he used, and seeing that they're very similar to the ones that I'm using, and I don't know, again, it's hard to explain. I actually am overwhelmed. I don't know what it is. I don't know why people are attracted to what he did and also what I'm doing. To me, it's just natural. It's been a path that I've been on in my entire life. I've built little shelters in the woods and slept in them from the time I was a kid. And then early 20s when I built that first cabin, lived in it for a while, used it as a camp for a while, years afterwards. I've never thought of not doing this with my life. So for it to come full circle and to be back at this, and then I guess looking for inspiration and you know, really concentrating on Dick Proenneke's story and his life here. I guess I feel a kindred spirit. I don't want to ever compare myself to him, and I know people do while watching this channel, and I appreciate that. It's big shoes to fill, and I think more than ever now that I'm here, I realize that the isolation, for one thing, spending that time here. I know he had a lot of visitors, and he actually left quite often, and he only spent 19 winters of the 30 here. So 11 either in town or in California with his brother Raymond, or back in Iowa, Primrose, Iowa, where he's from, and where he showed some of his films. But still spent an awful lot of time here alone. So dealt with harsh weather conditions, dealt with wildlife, firewood, the rigorous job of collecting firewood, and then hiking these hills to document all this. Like I said, just incredible that he was able to do that at that age and keep going. So I hope I can continue as well. Anyway, I am rambling again, but I'm rambling in the mountains this time, on foot and by mouth. So I think I should wrap this video up. I'm not going to wrap this video up. I'm going to go back down. I've got about an hour and a half hike back down to the camp, and then put that my bags together, grab it, cross over Hope Creek, have to wade through it, and get back to Dick's cabin, get a few more photos of the cabin itself, and then I'm sure my plane will be there by then. I'll be flying back to Port Alsworth. So I really have to thank Glenn Ellsworth. He's the great-grandson of Babe Ellsworth, who used to fly Dick Proenneke in here. And the family's been operating the farm lodge and Lake Clark Air since the 50s, I think, when they built the lodge. So family tradition, and it's awesome to be somewhat part of that, or to experience their services. And looking forward to getting back to talk to Glenn more about Port Alsworth and the Ellsworth family, and what they and their experience with Dick Proenneke. So I should probably do that now before it's not like you miss your plane. There's not many options to get out of here. It's a long, long hike. All right, let's hike back to the mountain and see you at the bottom. You can hear the wood thrushes in the background here. Chickadees. I don't know if they're exactly the same species as at my cabin, but they sound the same, the wood thrush and the chickadee. I don't know if you can see the haze. Well, you can't really tell, I guess, in the camera, but the far shoreline and the mountains and the lake are kind of obscure, hazy. That's smoke from the big forest fire that's burning down the valley at the other end of Lower Twin Lake. So when I was over here at the campsite and up in the hills, I wasn't smelling it all because the wind is kind of coming down the shoreline and not into that bay. But now that I'm out here, as soon as I approach this, thinking, well, I wonder, it's funny that they're having a fire by the cabin. But no, it's blanketing the whole valley. Anyway, I'm almost there. Hi everybody, welcome back to the cabin. Thanks for watching that video. Hope you enjoyed that portion of it. I'm going to get into a long-winded explanation of everything I experienced, everything I know about Dick Proenneke and about Twin Lakes and about everything that is interesting to me and hopefully interesting to you. It's coming from my perspective, having done you know, this, what you see behind you, building this cabin, the sauna, the outhouse, the woodshed, the forest kitchen, and now the longhouse that I'm building with some guys at the other end of my land here, and then some upcoming projects. So I've got a perspective that may be unique, maybe not, but it's my perspective and I wanted to share it with you for a few reasons. One is that obviously Dick Proenneke has been an inspiration to me, and because of his inspiration and others like him, I have set out to do something similar with my life. I'm 49 years old this year. I have hopefully a long life ahead of me. I plan to use that living simply, living closer to nature, but also getting out there, exploring the natural world, and also learning more about other people that are living this lifestyle and who are or have built log cabins maybe far in the past or are currently, or have lived self-reliantly or close to nature, outdoorsmen. I really want to expand my knowledge and my immersion in that lifestyle. And this first trip to Alaska, visiting Dick Proenneke's cabin, really the inspiration for so many people in the self-reliant community that you know, that's just sparked my interest even further, or developed my passion for this lifestyle even further. So I can't wait to continue to live it, but also to share it with you. So I have to thank you for following along, and also beg your forgiveness and patience for giving my perspective from on Dick Proenneke and his life as if I'm an expert, because I'm certainly not. There's certainly many more people that understand him and his lifestyle and the Alaskan experience more than I do. But because I am inspired, I do want to give my perspective and see how that changes over the years. I love the fact that I get to experience these things, get them down in film format and photographic format, and then relive those experiences myself over the years. So some of these videos, I'm actually putting more content that you may be interested in, but for me, it's something I get to reflect back on and to see where I was at this stage in my life, but also learn from it in the future and see what changes I've made or I'm making. So thanks for your patience regarding that. So I'm going to get into my explanation, my perspective of Dick Proenneke, of his cabin, of the location of Alaska and Port Alsworth, and the people that knew Dick Proenneke, as much as I can do it justice. But if you do want to learn far more than I have, the information that I have, then please just check out his journals. I'll give some links in the description below to the museum that's been created in Iowa in his memory, and also the library disperses his books if you want to read all of his journals, and then any other footage or film or writings about his life as possible. I'll provide what I can, but again, just do searches. You'll find all kinds of stuff on Dick Proenneke. So thanks for watching this video. If you're going to turn it off at this point, I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you're looking forward to hearing more about not only this story, but mine here, and then any other future stories that I stumble across as I continue to experience this lifestyle. So thanks for watching, and if you're tuning out now, then I look forward to seeing you up at the cabin next time. Take care. Now, if you are sticking around, I hope you enjoy this. Please let me know what you think about what I have to say and your own perspective on Dick Proenneke and the self-reliant lifestyle, and any suggestions you have for places or people that I should be visiting to learn more about this. So thanks, and see you at the end. So if you've been watching this video since the beginning, then you'll have seen me talk while I was out there, which I think is a pretty good authentic indication of how I felt while I was actually there. I think returning back to my cabin just gives it a different perspective, my outlook on how I felt there, and my takeaways, not being taken up by the emotion of the experience. So much has gone through my mind while I was there, but since I got back as well, about Dick Proenneke's entire story, about my own story, about what I'm doing here compared to what he did there. And I think it's probably unfair to make a comparison. I think it's maybe arrogant for myself to compare myself to Dick Proenneke or his situation or his life. So I try not to do that. I try to look at my own life uniquely and individually as myself, and not trying to compare myself to somebody else. I can't help but be influenced by Dick Proenneke and the people that came before him, and the people that continue to live off-grid lifestyles, or simple lifestyles, or outdoor lifestyles, regardless of when and where that is. So of course, like I said, I am influenced by other people, but I try to do things my own way, and I've done that since when I first built my first cabin when I was in my early 20s. I think my original inspiration didn't actually come from Dick Proenneke, although I probably had seen some of the footage on PBS back in the late 70s. Being born in 1970, my bigger inspirations at that time would have been The Wilderness Family, which I think came out in 1975 or 1977. I remember my family going to see it at the movie theater, and all of us were quite inspired by that. And then Jeremiah Johnson, favorite movie that I used to stay up with my father watching late at night when I was young. He built a cabin in that with his new family, and I just love that, and I think that may have been the biggest inspiration. And then in my teens I read Henry David Thoreau's Walden, which further inspired me. So that's where I got the drive to build these shelters in the woods that I did as a kid, and then build that first cabin. Now since then, after many years of raising a family and following or discovering and then following Dick Proenneke's story in more detail, I was inspired this time by his story and by his cabin. So I've been, like I said, I've been influenced for sure by him here, both here at the cabin and in my life. So when I talk about Proenneke and Twin Lakes and Alaska, it's from my perspective, not being an Alaskan, growing up in Ontario, Canada, not being in complete wilderness, but having access to relative wilderness north, a couple of hours north of where I grew up, north of Toronto. So different perspective, I think, completely, so therefore different lifestyle. So the reason I'm telling you this, I just wanted to give you some perspective on where my perspective is coming from. Some similarities, yet quite a few differences. But having now built a couple of three cabins, I guess, old one, and then these two cabins in the outdoor kitchen, the woodshed, I think I'm gaining enough perspective on the construction aspect of what Dick Proenneke did in Alaska. The lifestyle, I'm becoming more and more immersed in something similar, a similar lifestyle, although the landscape, like I said, is dramatically different. Surprisingly, the climate, the weather is not that different. I would say some of the low temperatures are a little bit lower there, but we get quite cold temperatures here as well. Winters would have been a little bit longer at Twin Lakes than here, but not dramatically so. We don't have real long, don't have long summers here. We actually have fairly long winters, although I'd say in the summer we probably get much warmer. I think the lakes and the wildlife are dramatically different there. The lakes are just so freezing. If you look up into the hills behind the cabin, into the mountains, those glaciers and the snowpack up at the top of the mountains, that's what's feeding these streams, creeks, rivers, and lakes. That's what's creating the water there, or adding the water to fill that lake, Upper Twin Lakes. And it's therefore freezing cold. Hope Creek, when I walked through it, I just couldn't believe it. My legs froze instantly. It was similar to what I experienced when ice just goes out here and I go fishing or swimming or bathing, and the water is just about freezing. It felt pretty cold, pretty close to that. It's one thing I couldn't help doing when I was in the cabin was to inspect every aspect of it, right down to counting the number of logs and the saddle joints that he did, the nails and the boards, the roofing material, all that kind of stuff. So what I noticed is that he used about 61 logs for the main structure, and he did tie those together in the corners using saddle notches, which is similar, well, I guess identical to what I did here. So that's where the log comes over top of the other one and sits, and you notch it out so that it sits over top of it like a saddle. And then he used spikes to spike them together as well, so that they wouldn't move in and out. On the roof itself, he took, those logs averaged, looked like about 6 inches, I'd say, average diameter, which is similar to what I have here too, actually. The roof boards, which were quite interesting, the rafters, he used spruce poles that were smaller. I would say they probably averaged, I don't know, 3.5, 4 inches, I would say. And there's actually 100 of those running so vertically, perpendicular to the roof, or the walls, so coming up, and they were spaced about 6 inches apart or something. So like I said, about 100 of those. And then on top of that, he used just tar paper and then polyethylene plastic on top of the tar paper, and then moss on top of that to hold it all down. I was surprised to see that right from the beginning. Even in the pictures you could tell that, but I was surprised that there was no roof boards, and that he left that spacing and the tar paper span that without creating any sags or anything from heat inside. So it seemed to work quite effectively. However, the roof did fail a number of times over the years. There's a couple of photo albums in the cabin. Unfortunately, I didn't take picture or video of those. I wish I had now. But there was quite a number of different roof materials you could see on the roof over the years, including a blue tarp for a while. So the roof would fail, and he would use whatever he had or could get flown in to repair that roof and keep it watertight. The other thing is that it actually caught on fire a few times. I'm not sure if all of the fires were caused by the fireplace, and if you look at the chimney you can see that there's not much clearance between the top of the chimney and the roof. I'm not sure why he stopped it at that point or why he didn't add to it later. So the sparks just came out and lit the roof on fire. Now I know he didn't use that fireplace for probably partially that reason, but also because it didn't draw properly, so that the cabin would fill up with smoke. And again, I'm not sure if he didn't have experience with it, or he didn't care because he wasn't planning on really using the fireplace much, because he knows it's inefficient compared to a wood stove. So the fireplace just sucks all the air right up the chimney, for example, and it's hard to cook on compared to a wood stove. So for whatever reason he didn't extend that. Now if he had have extended the fireplace higher above the roof, say 3 feet or even more, there's a good enough breeze there that he would have had good draw, I'm sure, to take that smoke away, and the fire would have burned better. So you'll see in a lot of the pictures, or I've seen those pictures in those photo albums as well, various things he used over the years just to block off the entrance of the chimney, including just pieces of insulation. And then he would store his journals actually in the hearth, inside that, in the firebox, I mean, inside the fireplace, and then just cover it up. So he ended up, like I said, not using it. So speaking of fireplaces, this is something I didn't think of reading the books for some reason, and I didn't really think about it really until I got in the cabin. I was looking around, looking at his cooking setup, and then really reinforced it when I got back here. And it was still quite hot when I got back from Alaska here, like 35 degrees Celsius, and like almost 40 with the humidex, so very warm. I don't know how he cooked inside the cabin all summer long. So he stayed there for 30 years, 19 of which he spent the winters there. So, and virtually, well, most of those 30 summers, let's say. I know he was away periodically. I haven't really got really far into the journals enough to understand when he wasn't there in the summer, but he did visit people outside of Alaska and in Alaska itself, and also had a lot of visitors, and had access to a plane, his own plane that he owned with his brother for a while, and flew with other people. So I'm not sure how much time he spent away from the cabin, but let's assume that he spent most of every summer there for 30 years. I don't light my fire inside the cabin. It's way too hot in here. Yeah, I know I have a big stove compared to what he had, but still, when it's even 20 degrees Celsius inside or outside, inside the cabin heats up so fast when you get a fire going that I think it would have been unbearable. I noticed he kept his door open a lot, which I do as well. Surprisingly, doesn't seem to be that big of an issue for bugs. And mice at this time of year aren't bad for coming inside the structure. So I'm not sure if that's how he dealt with it, or I don't know. I know he did, you know, he talks often about leaving like a pot of beans on the stove all day long while he was outside hiking and stuff. So maybe that's part of the answer, that the stove is not inside a lot of times while he had it burning. But again, I just would have thought that would be unbearable, the heat inside with the fire going, or the wood stove going. So I'm not sure why he never built an outdoor cooking area. I didn't see any evidence of one when I was there. I don't remember seeing pictures of him cooking outside, other than smoking some fish over by Hope Creek. And I don't, yeah, I've never read anything about him cooking outside. So again, I'm not sure. I'm more curious about that. I'd like to know a little bit more about it. So as far as water collection, obviously he had endless source of not only water, but like abundance of water, but cold, clean, clear water as well, especially from Hope Creek. There's times, including when I was there, that the lake is quite silty. It is coming down. That water is coming from nearby glaciers. It's filling the lake. There's a lot of silt in it. I'm not sure if he cared about that. I'm sure he got a lot of his drinking water still from the lake, but if he wanted crystal clear water, certainly Hope Creek had it. Now for me, I don't know if you can hear the rain outside. It is raining right now. This is great for me at this time of year, being early August, and when the creek's pretty dry. When we get rains like this, and we typically get them frequent enough, that my water I just collect in buckets, and once I get this roof finished here and an eave trough on that, I'm not even going to bother for this year, but for next year I'll have a complete water collection system so that I don't have to go down to the stream, especially at this time of year when it's muddy to collect. So Proenneke's fascination with nature, obviously, you can see it all around the cabin and inside the cabin and out, and that includes collections. Well, photographs that we don't see, or I haven't seen many of the photographs and film that he took over the years actually, but the artifacts that he collected, like the things on his mantle, those skulls of the eagle, and I think there's what, beaver, and is there a wolf or bear or a couple of other things. The wolf print that he took a plaster cast of, and the grayling fin, and I'm sure feathers. I'm sure he had other things too that are no longer there that he collected, and I'm the same way. I've always done that. I've got a deer jawbone and a skull. What else? Got antlers all over the place, and just artifacts from anything that I've found around the property or over the years outside. I tend to collect as well. And it's common. People have antlers who are, you know, not living in a place that is like this, living in a condo downtown Toronto or any city. A lot of people have these little connections to nature, like antlers and rustic furniture and so on, because of that deep connection we have with nature and how important it is to us. And I think we need to increase our exposure to nature, not decrease as we become more urban. And I'm sure he felt that way too when he went to a city. I'm sure he couldn't wait to get back to the cabin, even though he enjoyed the company of people, to get back to nature, getting his hands on something natural and real, and working with wood in particular and stone that I love doing, and I'm sure he loved doing for the same reason, just to reconnect with the natural world. As you can hear, it's pouring out right now. So this is the new metal roof that I installed that I'm standing under. I eventually finally broke down when I installed this lower sloped roof over top of this porch, or built this porch roof with the lower slope. I know I'm going to have an ice issue this year, ice damming. It's too low slope, the steep slope above, and then the heat from the chimney coming through. It's going to melt this snow here. It's going to freeze as it gets further down, hits this cold roof here. So for that reason, I took off the metal roof, or took off the wood roof that I had on this side, and installed a metal roof so that it's more water tight, with water sitting there like ice and then water melting and hitting it, but also so that this snow and ice slides off this metal roof easier. Anyway, people were wondering about the noise. Some people like the sound of the rain on the metal roof. Other people thought it might be loud. I'm not really hearing much from it. More that dripping sound you hear is water filling up these buckets. Just wanted to talk about his tools quickly. I'm not sure how many of those tools were authentic, the originals. I know the long crosscut saw was for sure, and it looked like to me like he used that for ripping as well, although just from reading his journals, he did mention that he had more than one saw. So I'm sure he had ripping and crosscut saws. Ripping is when you cut a board lengthwise with the grain. You need a different tooth configuration to do that efficiently. Now, one thing I noticed, these mosquitoes are still bad here. They're still buzzing around because of the rain we had this week and the heat. But notice out there, most of the time they weren't bad, and I didn't see many mosquitoes. There was quite a few big black flies though at certain parts. When I started hiking up by the creek, the black flies got bad in a couple places. I just kept climbing, got a higher elevation where there's more of a breeze, and they weren't as bad. So he probably didn't deal with bugs as much as me, except for a brief period in the spring, and then of course winter being longer would have had less bug conditions or issues then. So anyway, the tools that I use, just seeing the original pictures, the original film, and then reading what he used, quite similar. I don't think things have changed much over the years as far as what the best tools are for building a cabin. Still, you need saws. Like him, I prefer using hand saws over chainsaws. The auger for drilling the holes, and like for putting dowels in and stuff like that, for making furniture. Same thing. That in fact his auger is probably as old as mine, and vice versa. Mine's an antique. I've got several of them, but they're all old like that. Or most of the ones I have are old. Plumb bob, the chalk line. A lot of those. Keep in mind that this is not hundreds of years ago. So him building this cabin late 60s and living there into the 70s and building stuff in the 70s. I was born in 70s, so a lot of those tools that he used I grew up with, because my father was a construction worker and he had similar tools. So none of what he was using was novel from my standpoint. They were just some of the tools of the day, and then some tools that were used for decades or even century earlier that he used for posterity, and also because they're still efficient. What hammer and nails he still used, things like that. What else? Double-bitted axe seemed to be his favorite tool, I would say. So it's an axe with a face on both sides, an edge. You'll notice looking around the cabin that there's a ton of stuff made out of steel, out of metal, sheet metal, and most of that's from sheet metal fuel cans. The reason for that is that Twin Lakes is in a pass through the mountains, so it's actually a common stopover place for float planes that are going further into the interior, or I guess over to the west coast of Alaska from Anchorage, which is also why Port Alsworth was homesteaded originally by Babe Ellsworth back in the 40s, who was a pilot as well. So he set up an airstrip there in Port Ellsworth on Lake Clark, because planes were coming through anyway, and it was an ideal place to refuel, stop over before heading further west. Now, Twin Lakes was on that route as well, plus it was a popular hunting area. So people would fly in by float plane. The pilots would throw their old gas cans out there as they were refueling, or they'd refuel and discard their gas cans there, unfortunately. And as a result, there was quite a cache of them, a stash around the lake that Proenneke had collected and then put to good use. So we'd cut those into different implements, different tools, storage containers and lids and his bread pans, all of that kind of stuff. So I have some fuel cans that I've been collecting from when I bought my chainsaw a couple years ago. It came with a case of pre-mixed fuel. I'm going to see what I can do with those, see what if they can be fashioned into something as well to use them. What I really liked about Dick Proenneke was his thrift, how he put things for free to good use so that he didn't have to purchase anything, or had to purchase less. I think that's one of the principles of self-reliance, is to repurpose things, to reuse, recycle, and use what you can from the land or from what you're able to scrounge, beg or borrow, and instead of buying new and having things made for you. Saves money and resources. So I'm standing in my outdoor kitchen, and for the reason that I talked about inside, it gets too hot inside the cabin to be lighting a wood stove on a day like this. Even though it's rainy and damp today, it's still very warm, at least 25 degrees Celsius, and somewhat humid, so it would be unbearable inside the cabin to have a stove going, especially all day, cooking a long meal like a pot of beans or simmering a tough cut of meat or something like that. So outside kitchen is where I cook, either on the grill, in the earthen oven, or on the tripod or open fire, depending on what I'm cooking and where I'm working, whether it makes sense to do something, cook where I'm working. So food itself, this confused me a little bit about, I wouldn't say confused, but I was a little bit surprised that Dick Proenneke decided not to utilize the land more for food, although I understand the climate is harsh. I talked about it earlier when I was up on the mountain though, and I find the same dilemma as he did, and that's that if you're immersing yourself in nature in this environment and you have the place somewhat to yourself and you're surrounded by wildlife, you don't want to damage that, first of all, the flora, the forest itself, and you don't want to scare all the animals out of the valley or out of your environment, and you don't want to reduce the population because you enjoy seeing them. He also, like I said, set out to live the way he was living, but also capture it and share it with the world. Well, if there's no game left in the immediate area, then you can't share that with the world. So I had the same issue here. I do eat wild game for the most part, but I'm finding now that I'm here that I don't really want to harvest the game from around the cabin. So the bear, for example, that watched me almost 2 years ago now building the cabin, it was bear season actually. I needed meat, but I just couldn't bring myself to dispatching that bear, even though there's a little bit of a safety risk. Callie was a puppy. Did we even have? Yeah, we had Callie, and she hadn't started really, just started joining me at the cabin. So there was a little bit of a risk, but nevertheless, I let it live and enjoyed its company. I've had moose here, I've had deer, I've had grouse, rabbits, a number of other animals like martins, raccoons, fisher, otter, wolf, fox, porcupine now. So I have all these animals that I like having here, yet I need to eat. So I'm still struggling with that dilemma. So Proenneke ultimately decided, I guess, not to harvest much from the land. He, from his own account, only ever shot a dull sheep ram and a caribou bull. And I think that was even in the first year. I believe that was the first year, and then he never shot game there again, from what I understand. Now he did fish, and again that seemed to be sporadic. I can't get a real feel or understanding of how much he ate. He claimed to, in some years, eat quite a bit of fish, and then others not so much. But I think there would have been more than enough fish in the lakes there to essentially almost live off of those, to harvest as much as he needed for his own purpose. Being one man, keep in mind, if it was a family, that's another story. If it was a community, certainly wouldn't be enough resources at hand to feed the community. So the bottom line is he ended up flying or having his food flown in weekly or bi-weekly or every 3 weeks, depending on the season and what was available at the time. So as a result, he stuck to the staples for the most part. You'll see him cooking, or read about him cooking or baking sourdough bread and sourdough biscuits regularly. So he had the sourdough starter from Mary Alsworth, Babe's wife, and would get bags of flour in regularly. Powdered milk, baking soda, baking powder, sugar, salt, pepper, other condiments, slabs of bacon, big slabs, lots of beans, onions for almost for every meal, potatoes. So staples, things that he could store short term. They only need to last 2 or 3 weeks, so he didn't typically have large stores of food on hand at any time, and then canned stuff as well. And that cache that he built up on stilts behind the cabin, by again all accounts including his own, didn't really use it for food unless he had things sent to him by family, friends, or fans who would send him things in the mail. And so he'd get maybe Christmas cakes or, you know, nuts and chocolate and stuff like that he couldn't eat quickly. He might have stored some of that occasionally up in that cache, but for the most part it was really actually just used for gear storage. Now he did have a little cellar built, and I forgot to video it. I saw it, opened it up, looked in, and then didn't film it, but it was just a box in the ground. Permafrost was only down like 12 or 14 inches or something like that, so if you dig a hole in the ground it's pretty cold. It's essentially like an ice box. So he would, and then he had a piece of moss over top of the lid that he put over the hole. So he was able to store some of his food in there as well. Although that would have been at risk from animals. I'm not sure how often he did that. Now he did try to start a vegetable garden. He had limited success in the first year. I don't see any account where he even continued that garden after that first year. Not sure. I have to continue reading the journals, but it doesn't look like he did. Now the rhubarb patch though continued to provide, and actually is still there to this day. So I did get a photo of that, and presumably his vegetable garden was right there beside, I think that was beside Hope's cabin, Spike's cabin or Hope's cabin. Anyway, yeah, the garden, limited amount of garden that food that he was able to grow was grown right there. Conditions wouldn't have been wonderful like I'm discovering here, down in the acidic area by the stream. Not very productive, and he would have had similar conditions, very acidic and difficult, and especially with the permafrost, difficult to grow in. Now of course blueberries, he ate lots of blueberries. I think cranberries as well, and I'm not sure what other berries, but certainly the mountaintops are covered in blueberries. So between him and the bears, they were well fed on those while they were in season. So I think for me, when it comes to food, I want to do things quite different. I've actually been passionate about providing my own meals, I don't know, since I was a teenager. So I've always tried to do some foraging, hunting and fishing, and growing. And I'm just getting more and more passionate about that actually. So my plan is to actually, I don't know, I'm not sure if it'll be 2020. So it's fall, or it's August 2019 right now. Maybe by mid 2020 I'll be ready to start trying to live off of the land, at least for one full year, completely. Or, I can't say completely because I'll probably be using some stuff like flour still. But as much as possible from the land. And that would include hunting, fishing, foraging, and growing, and maybe even raising some livestock like chickens and for eggs and for meat, or quail or whatever. So I would like to pursue that. And again, not sure 100% why, but I gave some reasons why I think maybe Proenneke didn't feel that way. But also, it does complicate life trying to do that. It makes it a lot more challenging, and I feel like maybe that didn't fit with his idea of a simple life where he was forced to spend all of his time fending for himself. I think he might have found that since he had the money, and especially after 74, when he was not only living off of his pension and whatever money he was making showing his films back in Iowa, but the National Park Service started paying him in 74. I don't know if that continued right until he left in 98, I think it was, for good. Paying him just to document and act as a volunteer for the park. So I assume that continued. So it would have been limited funds, but it would have been something. And he got his film provided free to him as well, so that cut his costs down. So I'm thinking that probably he figured for the little amount of food that one man requires, especially basic food, that it was not worth trying to feed himself rather than just buy it and have it brought in by plane. Now, another way he worked off his, met his financial needs was that he worked in Port Alsworth quite often. It sounds like pretty well every spring and every fall he would spend time working on the farm. So planting potatoes in particular, it sounds like, was a regular thing every spring, and then harvesting them in late summer. And then probably sharing in the spoils, I would imagine, of that as well. That chicken coop, I did show the chicken coop. I think he built that. Not sure if it was mid-60s or... No, it must have been in the 70s, because Laddie who I interviewed, who was a friend of Dick Proenneke's, he's now in his 80s, he actually talked about chicken coops that grizzlies were getting into and destroying. So I'd imagine Proenneke must have built that chicken coop in the, let's say, mid-70s or sometime around then, and it's still standing and still being used to this day. So anyway, he worked off, I think it was almost bartered, so he would work on the farm or do house sitting enough in Port Alsworth to pay for all of the flights, his resupply flights that would come in regularly from Babe Alsworth. So keep in mind, as I'm telling you all of this, most of it I'm just getting from the books, from his journals himself, that he wrote himself, from the people that I talked to in town, from the park ranger that I talked to, and just what I'm observing while I was there. But I'm by no means an expert on Dick Proenneke or on Alaska, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But I'm just looking at it from my perspective of having done some of this stuff myself and understanding therefore what he went through or what he did. But I don't ever want to give the impression that I think what I've done here so far measures up to a man living independently for 30 years in Alaska. Now, speaking of independently, one of the things I was happy to hear is that he actually spent a lot of time not alone. So here's the issue. So I named my probably what's going to end up being my biggest video, 2 years alone in the wilderness. That wasn't meant literally necessarily that I've been out here alone for 2 years. What I meant is that I built this place for 2 years, and here's all the footage of me being alone, doing what I'm doing in the wilderness or here over those 2 years. And similarly with him, even though the film that was made about him, not by him, he filmed all of it, but it was actually edited and produced by somebody else other than Dick Proenneke. So he actually wasn't alone for 30 years, just to put that in perspective. I'm going to tell you the reason I'm telling you this, and I think it's worth emphasizing. First year he spent fully, I believe, most of the year there, didn't leave much, but he had regular visitors. And then over the next 30 years he spent 11 or 12 of them of the winters somewhere else, either in California, Iowa, Port Alsworth, or a combination of all of those things. His brother Raymond lived in California, so we'd go down there quite often. He just went and did other things to provide for himself. I noticed him different places in Alaska by float plane, exploring the area, and therefore he did have a lot of contact with people. I think probably the longest he ever went without contact was maybe 3 weeks, when Babe Alsworth couldn't come in to resupply because of the weather or something else. So the reason I'm telling you this, and the reason I think it's important, I was concerned as I'm setting out on this journey that not being alone was sort of a hindrance to the experience. Like I wasn't being fully immersed or challenged because I wasn't alone or so remote that I didn't have access to people or socialization. But the reality is that people need socialization to stay sane. In fact, if I show the whole interview of me with Laddie and his wife, Glenda, he talks about the people that have tried to come up to Alaska in that area and tried to live independently, self-reliant, and they basically went crazy in the first months, never mind years. Holy smokes, look at that rain. I'm gonna have to move in so you can actually hear me. I hope you can still hear me okay. I'm actually inside the sauna right now, the bathhouse that I built. And Callie's still running around chasing the dummy. She doesn't care about the rain, she just cares about fetching. So while I'm in here, just quickly talking about hygiene. So one thing you realize when you're spending a lot of time alone and you're outside is that cleanliness is still important, but it's not as important as when you're in close contact with people indoors, of course. So for that reason, I bathe quite often, either in the stream, the river, or sometimes in here, although this will be more used in the winter. Rain, I'll just go out in the rain right now and bathe, naked because nobody here right now. And it's just a reality, and you don't need soap or shampoo. It just ends up attracting bugs, and it's not really necessary. You can use it when you're really dirty, but again, it's not necessary to get it completely clean and feel fine, especially with short hair. So he was the same. The water was freezing cold, so he would obviously still bathe in it. Probably more sponge bath, but I think a lot of the times, like I've done most for the first year especially, was just heat up water, which is always on the wood stove anyway, in one of those turkey roasters. I'll just heat water up there and bathe. But keep in mind, I do go into town a lot, or I did a lot in the past, especially most of the time actually. Now I still go in at least once or twice a week, or at least for a couple of days a week. So I'm able to bathe in town as well, although that's going to come to an end shortly, at least for a while. And you'll see that in some upcoming videos why that is, but that's imminent, like the next month or two. But anyway, I love this rain because it's allowing me to collect lots of water, overflowing, gardens growing well, and I've got lots of water for bathing and drinking now for a while. Probably for the rest of the summer actually I'll have enough. It is pouring out here still. I'm not gonna get any work done outside today anyway, so another editing day. So it's interesting, when I'm sitting at his desk, what I wrote in there, by the way, was, if you didn't see that earlier in the video, was just the date, who I was, where I'm from, Ontario, Canada, and did put my self-reliance in there, Sean James from my self-reliance, and thanks for the inspiration. And obviously I truly meant that. He was an inspiration not only for me but for the world, and sort of the godfather of self-reliance. And Twin Lakes and Dick Proenneke's cabin is sort of the mecca for people interested in self-reliance and simplicity, and I think living with nature. And that's one of the, I think, the legacies that he left, was his love of nature, his love of wild places and protecting those wild places, of being thrifty, of being satisfied with less, and being as self-reliant as possible. And I've talked about this often myself, that self-reliance that he had, ability to take care of himself and to be efficient, proficient, allowed him to help others, which he did. He was able to be, he was well known for his ability to make equipment work that other people couldn't get to work, and so on. So he did have a value to society, not only while he was a working man up until he was 50, but also after the fact, inspiring generations now of people interested in the outdoors, interested in nature and protecting it, and of living as self-reliant as possible. And of being happy, satisfied with what he had, his place in life. There's more than one comment from others about his how content he seemed to be, how he was happy with his life, happy with simplicity, and not feeling like he had to go out and conquer the world and overconsume and so on. So again, that is an inspirational person and an inspirational story and an inspirational life. And I think a lot of us could learn from that, including myself, to be satisfied with simplicity, with less, be less impactful on the earth, on the environment, on the resources, to enjoy life and make the most of each of our own situations. So I think for me, this trip and the visit to Dick Proenneke's cabin and to Twin Lakes and to Alaska itself, the takeaways for me is, first of all, just a reaffirmation of where I want to go with my life, what I want to do here. It's caused me to actually sit back and reflect a little bit on how busy I've created my life, and trying to slow that down a little bit. And you'll notice that I haven't made much progress here in the last month and a half, not only because of this trip, but even after that trip, as I go through the footage and spend more time with my family, especially with some major upcoming changes in our family dynamics over the next, specifically soon, over the next month and then thereafter. So it's causing me to look at that and slow down a little bit and reflect and appreciate the simple life, get out and explore more. I love the fact that Dick Proenneke built things for a couple of years, built his infrastructure there, and then really nothing for almost 30 years. Just enjoyed the place and the amount of time that he freed up to allow him to just go on hikes and explore and film and observe wildlife, visit with friends and family, and just do what he wanted to do with his life without outside pressures. It's re-motivated me to continue seeking that. It's also sparked an interest in other people living that lifestyle, other self-reliant people, off-grid, more log cabins, the stories behind those. And it's something I would like to dedicate a little bit more of my time to, is to do more exploring, at least in North America, of other similar stories that have just never been published. See, one of the things about Dick Proenneke is that the story, or the life that he lived, it is unique, but it's not unheard of. There's lots of people, especially in Alaska and in the north, and throughout the world at least, or more remote places, live in similar lifestyles that just don't document it, and it hasn't been distributed like his story was. So I'd like to start visiting some of those people so that I can not only just to satisfy my curiosity, but what I might learn from those experiences. So I do plan on seeking those out more, and getting out and finding out what else is out there similar to this. So you'll see more of that. Not sure I'll get to any of that this year because it's still busy as I get the place ready for my wife to join me. And it's a bit of a mess, especially right now. I need to clean it up. But that's definitely something I want to do in the future, and something I think this trip in particular, and Dick Proenneke's story in particular, has inspired me to do. So yeah, please keep an eye out for that. And if you are interested in that or any of what I'm doing here, please don't forget to subscribe and follow along, and give me your comments, suggestions about where places maybe that you know of, or cabins that you think I'd be interested in, and so on. I'd really appreciate that. So what I started saying about the people and places that he visited and he talked about was that it was almost concerning me hearing a story that, or reading the title, Alone in the Wilderness, that he was truly alone, because that's not a natural place to be, and it's not a natural lifestyle for any human to live and stay sane. So the fact that he was actually a normal human being who did crave socialization, did socialize quite frequently, and still liked people, but was also but still preferred to be alone. Not only also liked it, but actually preferred to be alone. I'm similar to that. I have a great family and friends and this awesome community online here, but I still crave as much solitude as I'm getting. So I understand his perspective, but I also understand that he wasn't a hermit. He wasn't mentally ill to the point where he wanted to be alone and never interact with people. So that was a relief to me, I have to admit, which is why I wanted to tell you more of the story behind the story, so that you realize that it's not a viable, or it's not a good option to escape from society completely and turn your back on society and not participate. I think he had the right approach, and I'm hoping I'm going to find the right balance, and that I have the right approach as well in my life. So again, I want to apologize if this came across as arrogant. I'm not intending to compare myself or to minimize anything that Dick Proenneke did. I have the utmost respect for not only him, but everybody living that kind of lifestyle and dedicating themselves to it. It is an inspiration that he did what he did, that he did it for so long, but also, again, like I wanted to point out, is that he had help in a good way. He had socialization in a good way. I think it was the right approach. I think he had the right amount of people in his life, and the right amount of exposure, and the right amount of exploration and travel to supplement his simple living. I don't I don't believe, and maybe I'm wrong and maybe it works for some people, but I don't believe that a hermitage is the right approach. I don't think escaping from society and not interacting and just staying in that one location is healthy necessarily, or even possible for most people. I know for me that as much as I love this place, I truly love this place, and I truly love being here as much as possible, I also feel like the times I spend away from the cabin are as valuable as the time I spend here alone. And I'll continue to, I think, share some of those socializations, some of my socializations, show some more of my family over the years on this channel, and especially in my other channel, so that I don't give that impression that I truly am alone in the wilderness. I want people to understand that good relationships are necessary, or at least contribute immensely to happiness. I know that for myself. I know that for most people that I know, and I understand that now from Dick Proenneke, reading his story, seeing his place, being immersed in that environment, and talking to the people in the community that he spent the most time in. So I truly felt like it was necessary for me to provide my perspective at the end of this video, to convey that message that probably was not in the original film, if that's all you've ever seen, or films of Dick Proenneke's story. If that's all you've ever seen and you think he was truly alone in the wilderness without interaction, I think that's not necessarily a healthy message for the world. But I know that he has made a great impact on society, and people have been inspired by him and his story. And I think those messages of self-reliance, thrift, environmentalism, spending as much time in nature as possible, and protecting that nature, I think those messages are as important today as maybe, well, I know they're more important today than they were back in his time and previous times. And it's a message that I would like to continue to propagate here on my channel and in my life as well. So for that, I thank him. He really is an inspiration for all of those reasons to me, as well as to a lot of the people watching these videos.